Today's episode is sponsored by Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right below this video. He did it. He did it this morning. We've been warning about this for months. Donald Trump this morning suggested that the 2020 presidential election be delayed. He is doing it. This is not a dress rehearsal. This is happening. It's not happening yet. I mean, he's trying to do it. I get the authoritarian chills when I read the tweet. Donald Trump tweeted this morning, with universal mail-in voting, not absentee voting, which is good, 2020 will be the most inaccurate and fraudulent election in history. It will be a great embarrassment to the United States of America. Delay the election until people can properly, securely, and safely vote. The president of the United States is actually suggesting that an election which he might lose by historic margins to Joe Biden should be delayed, postponed. The president is trying to do the thing they said Obama would do. Remember 2012 and 2016? The conspiracy right insisted Barack Obama is a Marxist, dictatorial, authoritarian nightmare who is going to declare martial law, send troops to cities, and suspend the election in order to stay in power indefinitely. Barack Obama was never going to do any of those things. Donald Trump has sent armed paramilitaries to cities around the United States, and Donald Trump has now suggested that the presidential election be delayed. He wants to delay an election prescribed by the Constitution. This is a constitutional issue. This is a red alert. It is no surprise that today we got the worst GDP numbers since World War II, and Donald Trump's polling continues to implode, and Trump says, you know, we should look at delaying the election. We have never had anything like this. It's very tempting to say this is unprecedented. We've never seen any. We have not had anything like this. My hope is that this backfires and Trump loses Republican support. I'm right here waiting for the Republicans that call themselves constitutional conservatives. Come out and denounce this. I'm waiting for you. Make me proud. I'm ready. This is actually closing in on the fascistic characteristics that they attributed to Barack Obama, which never existed. We cannot allow this to happen. And by the way, how is it safe to open schools and have teachers and students there for 8 hours a day, but it's not safe to go vote, which, depending on where you live, takes 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and it can be done by mail, making that argument irrelevant anyway? Now, as a side note, Trump says universal mail-in voting is bad, but absentee would be okay. This time around, all that we're talking about, all that states have done, many states, is expand absentee voting to anybody who wants to do it. It is not some new or different system that would be rife or open to fraud. It is not that. This is an attack on the foundation of the country and an attack on democracy. Can Donald Trump do it? Well, it's actually not up to him. The good news is that it is not up to Donald Trump to delay the election. If states wanted to, you could delay the elections somewhat, but I think that by mid-December, the electors have to decide who are their votes going to. And if you don't have a new president elected on January 21st, again, my understanding from speaking to some constitutional experts is if you don't have an election and Trump has not been reelected, on January 20th, rather, he's no longer the president, and it would go to the Speaker of the House, which would be Nancy Pelosi, which I can't imagine Donald Trump wants. But this is going to be a question of, do any governors agree? Is there any governor, Republicans only, I would assume, that will even consider saying, I think Trump might be up to something that makes sense here. I think we should delay the election. Or will all governors say, we're doing the election, and that's basically it? Now, in the coming hours, every Republican that is interviewed on corporate media should be asked, Donald Trump suggested delaying the presidential election. Do you think that we should do it? put every single one of them on the record, watch some of them start to equivocate. Well, I didn't see the tweet. I'd have to see what it is that Donald Trump wants to do. I can't hear you. I think our connection is bad. Simple yes or no. Should we delay the election? Start putting them on record. This is not practice. This is the game. It's happening right now, and he is doing it, and it is absolutely horrifying. I've been warning you about today for months, July 30th, the day that we knew we would get our estimate of the second quarter GDP number of the United States. We received that number this morning, and it is historic. It's historically bad, I mean. Why did Donald Trump tweet today that he wants to delay the election? I believe that the GDP number is part of it, in addition to the collapsing polls. The United States economy shrank by the biggest amount on record in the second quarter this year. Annualized second quarter GDP was down 32.9%. The economy contracted annualized by roughly a third in the second quarter. Now, the expectation was to be down 34. So being down 33 is like slightly less bad than the expectation, but a historic, disastrous number. Now, we know why. It's very easy to say, listen, it's not Trump's fault. It's coronavirus. Okay, but the Trump administration has failed in terms of the coronavirus response. So the health numbers, meaning cases and deaths, are worse than the numbers had to be. Just look at other countries. And the economic numbers are also worse than they had to be. The big areas of reduction in GDP were not shockingly consumer spending in the personal consumption category. And remember that this is just an estimate. We get more precise numbers about another month out. So this is an estimate on July 30th. We're expecting the sort of more fine-tuned numbers right around August 30th. And who knows what will be going on by then with coronavirus. Now, meanwhile, new jobless claims have also gone in the wrong direction. New jobless claims are up for the second week in a row to 1.43 million new claims. This is the 19th straight week with more than 1 million people losing their jobs. Of the 19 weeks, new jobless claims, it was like 6.6 million that first week or the second week. And then they've been declining for 15 weeks. Now things have turned around and new jobless claims have started to increase. And the unfortunate reality is that it could get much worse. If states have to continue pulling back, if we continue to see cases rise, deaths have spiked, and we'll talk about that next, I believe states are going to have to pull back and the numbers are going to once again get worse. We were told in April, May, by June 1st, June 15th, there will be very few new cases and barely any deaths. There will be a break between wave one and what is expected to be a second wave in the fall. We're not getting that break. We are actually, when we got down to 20,000 new cases a day, things started opening irresponsibly in some states, more responsibly in others. And we are now seeing the effects of that. And the next thing I want to talk about is the numbers and the trajectory that these numbers could very soon take. So let's talk about coronavirus deaths. For weeks, almost for 2 months, the right and the anti-science crowd were telling us, don't worry, cases are up, but deaths aren't going to go up. And we would say, why not? And they would come up with explanations like, well, listen, it's young people now who are getting the virus. Young people don't get very sick. They don't go into the hospital. They don't die. So even though cases are spiking starting in mid-June, we're not going to see a spike in deaths. Some others would say it's a less serious strain now. The virus is mutated and it's far less serious now. Others said we're better at treating it. Deaths won't go up. We've got, hydroxy and remdesivir, and we're just not going to see that death spike because we're better at treating it. Well, for the 10th time in the last month, we again have set a 30 to 60 day new high water mark in terms of deaths. And yesterday, 1,485 people died of coronavirus. 1,485. That's half a 9/11 in a single day. This is the most deaths yesterday since May 27th, or about 64 days. We are quickly losing all the progress that was made during April and early May. We're back at the May 27th death number. If you look at the brown line on the graph that we have up on the screen, that's the 7-day moving average. So sometimes looking at individual days can be less than a complete picture because we tend to get less reporting on the weekends. So if you look at a 7-day average, you can see that the 7-day moving average of deaths has been climbing since right around the 4th of July holiday here in the United States. That should have been a signal that things weren't being done correctly. It has now been almost a month since then. As you probably know by now, deaths are a lagging indicator to cases. So even if we believe that cases started to flatten on July 16th, now many of us don't believe that because that's the day on which reporting from hospitals shifted from going to the CDC, instead going to Trump's Department of Health and Human Services. But if you believe that cases started to flatten on July 16th, then that means we are still weeks from the peak in terms of single day deaths. And that means that 10 or 14 days from now, the daily death toll could be once again tragic. It could get to a 9/11 every day or just short of it. Now, as you know, as it's almost become apocryphal at this point, but I've been saying Massachusetts has handled the virus quite well. But if you're all in the same pool and someone's peeing in the deep end and you're in the shallow end, eventually you're going to get some of that pee in the shallow end, if you understand what I'm saying. Eventually it's going to reach you. We're all in the same pool. And even here in Massachusetts, it's a slow uptick, but there's an uptick. And it started in mid-July. We had, 175, 200 cases a day for weeks. We're now more regularly getting 300, 325 cases a day. And we're about to see, is it 50,000? Is it 100,000, 150,000 college students flying in over the next 4 weeks to start college? And add to that we're about to get hit with the flu season in the United States. I'm seeing CVS and Walgreens advertising flu shots. I'm going to get mine very soon. This could be ramping up to arguably the worst or most difficult fall in the United States from a public health standpoint, I will just say in a very long time. Does it go all the way back to 1918 and the flu? I'm not sure, but certainly in decades. People just aren't listening. Much of the world did handle this. This was not the only way that it could have gone, the trajectory in the United States. I hate that it has become political, but because Donald Trump did fail us, he has to suffer the consequences. He has to be removed in November. I don't even need a president that will do anything that special. We just need one that will do. I was just interviewed actually on a New Zealand a program, and we'll be posting that very soon to YouTube and Facebook. Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, she didn't bring any unique medical knowledge. She just realized that she shouldn't pretend to know things she doesn't know. She's going to defer to the doctors and let the doctors lead the way with her support. That's all I need a president to do. But we are now back where we were months ago. We're sort of starting from scratch in a sense. There are discussions about needing a full lockdown reset to get things under control. I don't think there's any political appetite for that at this point in time. And think about all of the people who stayed home for months, sacrificed financially, sacrificed, psychologically and emotionally to flatten the curve. We're back to where we were back then. And we are still up against mass evictions, growing unemployment. Consider the disrespect, by the way, to the healthcare workers. Remember, they're heroes. We appreciate them, right? Well, then why isn't everybody wearing a mask? How is it respectful to healthcare workers to walk around with no mask and to have indoor dining and have casinos open and movie theaters? We haven't done the right thing for them as much as for the victims of the virus. It's disgusting. It's tragic. And the next 3 months, it could be really bad. It could be really, really bad. And I want to hear what's going on in your state. I am on Twitter at @DPakman. Let me know how you see it. Let me know what's taking place.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist. And what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Arlona Hadley and Carl Antisel. Arlona and Carl, thank you so much for your support. And a big thank you to Charles Hess, who's today's longtime sustaining member of the day. It's great to become a member. It's even better to stay a member for 5 years. And that's exactly what Charles has done. Grab a membership at joinpakman.com. We have some tremendous discussions happening on the David Pakman Show subreddit. We have more than 21,000 of our viewers and listeners subscribed for free. I'm selling you nothing here. It's just a place to discuss politics. davidpakman.com/Reddit is the place to find it. User Lefty Guitarist posted a relevant thread about how a vaccine won't be enough to end the pandemic. And the user points out accurately that there are many people anticipating the vaccine and that it will help, but that social distancing and mask wearing and avoiding large crowds are probably going to be necessary for some time. And there's a few reasons why. Number one, the vaccine does not give you 100% immunity. Number two, there's going to be a ton of people that don't get the vaccine. There have been people so propagandized in this country to believe that, Bill Gates wants to microchip you with the vaccine or whatever, that there's going to be a ton of people that just opt out. So this is absolutely correct. And there's another point, much like with the polio vaccine, where there was an initial vaccine that was not particularly effective, and over time they became more effective. Once the vaccine is out, both for production reasons and for effectiveness reasons, it's still going to be a build to getting back to a point where we can say we can go back to normal. So in total, by the time this is all said and done, going back to January or so, which is, when we had our first case, we're probably talking about a 2-year period fully. Although hopefully a lot of a sort of normal day to day will return in the winter or early spring of 2021. User Wagon Wheel What says, David might not be aware, but Trump can't get booed throwing out the first pitch because there are no fans in attendance at baseball games this baseball season. That's absolutely correct. And that I made a mistake earlier this week when we covered Donald Trump canceling his first pitch event at the Yankee Stadium, at the Yankee Red Sox game at Yankee Stadium on August 15th, and it turned out that it was never scheduled. I said there are 3 reasons. 1, Trump doesn't really know how to throw a baseball. Number 2, Trump doesn't want to get booed. And number 3, Trump doesn't want to be there as players kneel during the anthem. Number 2 was wrong because there were no fans, and that I was incorrect about that. I apologize for having misled you. To the extent that I did, it was accidental. And this viewer is completely right. Join the discussion yourself at davidpakman.com/Reddit. We have moderators. We have standards that are applied to the subreddit, and I invite you to come in and participate. Donald Trump yesterday took a fiasco field trip to Texas to brag, I guess, about coronavirus, and also to brag about how he's supporting coal and oil and fracking. All things we should actually be making obsolete rather than trying to do more of. It was really the stuff of nightmares. I'm going to run through it. I watched it live so that you didn't have to, although about 20,000 people did watch it live with me on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. But here are some of the lowlights. And again, this is just a reminder that we cannot have this in the White House. This has to be cleansed. I don't know if we can use bleach or isopropyl to cleanse it, but we somehow do need to remove this. Now, if you're watching along with me, you're going to notice in these videos that Donald Trump is particularly sweaty and extra orange. It is Texas after all, and I understand it was very, very hot there. It's become super clear to me that psychologically these events where Trump, will tour a factory or a business and then he'll rant to a hand-picked group of sycophants. These have become sort of placeholders for the big rallies that Trump would like to be doing to boost his ego, but he can't realistically do right now because of the virus. Now, Donald Trump did have one of what I would call these major glitches where he interrupts a word right in the middle of the word and sort of has to reset his brain. It happened in the middle of a word I actually can't identify. Maybe you can. Let's take a look.
We are now at the strongest point militarily we've ever been due to I'll tell you, Ted, where is Ted? He was a big leader in this. Stand up again, Ted.
These glitches have become very frequent recently, but only one such glitch during yesterday's event. Donald Trump later complained that Joe Biden's climate plan is too aggressive, which is like, well, that's great. Let's be aggressive. I want to see that. And during this part of the rant, Donald Trump referred to the year 2030, which is a milestone year for Joe Biden's climate plan. He referred to it as the year 230, which is, of course, a long time ago.
Seeking an even higher level of restrictions, mandating net zero carbon emissions, which frankly is impossible, for all new homes, offices, and buildings by 2030. Not possible to do. And if you ever did it, it would cost so much that your home would be valueless.
As I listen to Trump rattle off what Biden wants to do, I'm reassured by it. I think that's great. Let's try to do it. Maybe we can't, but I want to be, Trump is doing the opposite. Trump's rolling back restrictions on polluting. He's rolling back vehicle emissions, vehicle efficiency and emissions standards. Emissioncy. I kind of like that portmanteau. I want a guy who maybe is going to try to do too much, and maybe we don't get there, but let's try to do it. Trump criticizing that. Donald Trump also praised Texans during this event as loving America so much that they couldn't breathe, which is kind of weird imagery given everything that's going on with the I can't breathe protests and what happened with George Floyd being choked to death. Let's take a look at this bizarre moment.
Generations of Texas oil workers before you gave every last bit of sweat and heart and grit that they had to build up this country. They loved our country. They loved our country so much they couldn't breathe.
Donald Trump also kept accusing Joe Biden in recent weeks of dementia. Here again, Donald Trump couldn't even say Minneapolis.
Very quickly, just like we did in Minneapolis and just like we will do another place.
So Minneapolis, Ulysses S. Grant talking about plasma instead of plasma. Trump's having no shortage of problems himself. And then maybe the most sort of notable policy-related claim that Trump made yesterday is, again, this just ridiculous talking point that Joe Biden wants to end the suburbs, but Donald Trump is going to save them. And this is actually just the dog whistle stuff we've become accustomed to. I'll explain it after we look at the clip.
That's not going to happen. And by the way, I just ended the rule on suburbs. The suburbs, people fight all of their lives to get into the suburbs and have a beautiful home. There will be no more low-income housing forced into the suburbs. I abandoned and took away and just rescinded the rule. It's been going on for years. I've seen conflict for years. It's been hell for suburbia. We rescinded the rule 3 days ago. So enjoy your life, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy your life.
So this is really bad. It's first of all, this is a racially tinged dog whistle. No low-income people invading the suburbs is reminiscent of the black folks moving in next door stuff of the 1950s and 60s and prior eras. It's just complete racially tinged red meat for his followers. Secondly, Trump doesn't even really seem to understand what he did. He says he rescinded a rule. Now, he doesn't even know what he's talking about, but I'll tell you what he's talking about. There's a 2015 rule, the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule, okay, AFFH, and it requires local governments, if they're getting federal funding, they have to study racial bias in housing patterns and have a plan to address it. That's all. Like, it's so milquetoast. It's so almost nothing. If you get money, You have to study racial bias in housing. And if you determine there is racial bias, you have to address it. That's all it does. And Trump is now claiming to be some kind of hero for rescinding it. It's just racist red meat. That's all it is. And Trump tweeted something similar earlier in the day about it, widely derided as despicable, saying, quote, "I am happy to inform all of the people living their suburban lifestyle dream," capitalized, by the way, "that you will no longer be bothered or financially hurt by having low-income housing built in your neighborhood. Your housing prices will go up based on the market and crime will go down. I have rescinded the Obama-Biden AFFH rule. Enjoy. This is complete and total red meat." He has now gone on to say we should look at delaying the presidential election. This is an ignorant, delusional, narcissistic, authoritarian nightmare. There's very little more to say. It just has to end in November. We've all got to vote. That we know the solution. We don't have, it's not like one of these complex problems where we say, we've identified a problem, but figuring out a solution is really tough. What could we possibly do? Voting starts in 4.5 weeks in some states. We're 3 months almost to the day, 3 months plus a few days from we know what to do. We have the solution. There is no greater power than having a problem and knowing the solution. Let's now actually carry it out. Make sure you're following the David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show, and follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. Check out recent pictures of completely safe, socially distant beach going that I did. Shocking to many people. Yes, I do have legs, although they are not ever visible during the show. Follow me on Instagram at david.pakman for a break from the bad news, as I like to say.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%. Vote soon 18.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome back to the program Ben Burgess, who's a philosophy professor at Georgia State University Perimeter College, also author of the book Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. Ben has joined us before. Appreciate your time, Ben.
Well, thanks for having me, good.
So I've been talking to my audience about a concern of mine, which is that I'm seeing some who maybe in times past had a pretty clearly defined set of policy ideas that they found important. Sometimes they'd be socially democratic policy ideas. Some are actual socialists. And I've seen the focus on the policy sort of replaced or preempted in some cases by a rhetoric that we would define as populist. And as people like Federico Finkelstein, for example, have written about extensively, that rhetoric often sounds very similar on the left and on the right, and can sometimes be used to sort of separate people from a defined set of policy ideas. And sometimes, in the worst of cases, people end up supporting candidates whose policy ideas, when it comes right down to it, are really antithetical to where they started. Let's open it there. Is this a concern that you share? If so, how are you seeing it manifest? If not, where am I wrong?
No, that's absolutely a concern that I'd share. I mean, I think like populism might be most helpfully thought of as a rhetorical style. There's the people and there's some sort of elite, that you're counterposing the people to. And there's nothing wrong with that rhetorical style. That's how a lot of people that I like would frame things. That's how Bernie Sanders talks. But it's also a rhetorical style that you could use in service of all kinds of different political agendas. There's certainly lots of right-wing versions of it. And it's in itself, that's kind of empty, right? That doesn't actually tell you much of anything about whether somebody is going to do things that you'd like. in terms of policy, whether they're even really on the same side of you as you are in terms of policy.
Yeah, one of the sort of corporate media players that has really benefited from the use of this rhetoric, I think, is Fox News' Tucker Carlson, who will often frame a lot of issues as it's the people maybe against corporations, it's the people against elites, it's the people against whoever. But then he'll warn you, make sure Black Lives Matter doesn't take your house or whatever. Right. And the solutions are very nationalistic, often xenophobic. Is this new? I mean, it seems to me that even if you go back to earlier 20th century Europe, there are examples of populist rhetoric being used, and it's sort of maybe not that clear whether we're talking about left or right populism, and it is sort of a gateway to some pretty severe authoritarianism.
Yeah, no, I mean, that could certainly be true, although I guess the point that I'd really emphasize as far as Tucker goes is that, look, it's possible, like there's nothing that's impossible, there's nothing you can just rule out about the idea that you could have somebody who really did have some creepy right-wing ideas about immigration or something else, who really could have some degree of redistributionism about economics. I think there are global examples of that. I think there are historical examples of that kind of thing. But in his case, I think that like the creepy right-wing ideas about immigration are real and the economic populism is pretty hollow. So he does talk like that, right? He'll criticize corporations for their lack of economic patriotism. He'll even criticize them sometimes for paying low wages. But then the obvious follow-up question is, okay, so if the wages are too low, should we support raising the minimum wage? Should we change labor laws so it's easier for people in Amazon warehouses to unionize? And that other shoe never quite drops. He never really supports any of that stuff.
What's the prototypical example of what you alluded to where in theory you could be sort of on the right but still support a sort of redistributive economic populism? Who would we look to as an example of that?
Yeah, I think that certainly there are right-wing and even fascist parties in Europe that certainly support more of that stuff than anybody like Tucker Carlson or Josh Hawley or any of these other alleged American right-wing populists would. Like the sort of, National Front types in France, places like that, granted, they're operating in a very different context where a lot of that stuff is already just sort of part of the accepted consensus. It's already happened, right? So of course they're going to support it. And on some level that might not even mean much because you think, okay, sure. And like British Tories say they support keeping the NHS. But they do sometimes at least appeal to saying that they would even increase, maybe certain sorts of social spending, if they were in power. And of course, who knows what they would actually do if they're in power. But I guess the point that I'd really want to emphasize is that this is something that you really don't get, right, in the American equivalent of most of these people, that they're really, it really isn't the case. Like when somebody like Steve Bannon talks about anything that he wants to do economically that would break from Republican orthodoxy, like once you really start digging into the details, right, because some of it, he says things like deconstruct the administrative state that sounds sort of vaguely radical. And then you think more about that. You're like, wait a second, do you just mean what everybody else in your party means by deregulation and
small government, et cetera?
Yeah, right. And you start to dig into what he means. And I think maybe it's if Bannon had totally gotten his way in the Trump administration, maybe we'd be raising the top marginal tax rate to something closer to what it was in the Clinton years and spend some of the money on infrastructure spending. But then you ask obvious questions about, okay, but there are tens of millions of people who don't have health care. Are we going to do Medicare for all, or are we going to eliminate tuition at public universities? Or are we going to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour? And that's not something I ever see the Bannons or the Carlsons or the Howleys of the world really getting behind.
Can you talk a little bit about, or I guess maybe to frame this up, there's some interesting scholarship about how there's a link between populism and totalitarianism. And sometimes as soon as you broach that, people will say, are you saying populists are dictators? No, that's not the allegation that's being made. But can you talk a little bit about what that link is and where the overlap actually exists and what the limits of that are?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a sense, like, there is at least one sense in which I want to push back on this a little bit, because I think that something that you often get from centrists certainly is this way, this sort of habit of demonizing populism in general, and using that word maybe even as a way of kind of associating like good benevolent social democrats, like Bernie Sanders, with people who are right-wing populists who are more likely to have these authoritarian tendencies. And really, I mean, like, what I'm kind of criticizing when I say, hey, don't fall for Tucker Carlson's alleged economic populism is the flip side of that, right? People who say, yeah, these things are good, and like there's some commonality there, right, that I really don't think there is. But I do think it's true that if you think that the status quo is very bad, that you do set up some sort of opposition between the people and some kind of hostile elite, right? That certainly can go in an authoritarian direction. I mean, it's not. I mean, as we're having this conversation, Donald Trump, who often appeals to those things, just floated a trial balloon on Twitter about delaying the presidential election.
Yes.
So it's not like those sorts of concerns are just coming out of nowhere, that they're totally unfounded. But where I would hold the line is that I think you can have very positive left-wing movements that use populist framing, that really don't have those authoritarian tendencies, and really what I want to do is to separate these, right? That like when we're just talking about populism, whether we put a plus next to it or a minus next to it,
yes,
the danger is that we end up conflating these things that really don't have a lot in common with each other.
When you look at the candidacy of somebody like Bernie Sanders as an example, just to sort of think about it, do you, in retrospect, do you think that the campaign had the right balance of rhetoric and policy? Do you think that if it did, that there was something in terms of how it was received or understood that maybe was a missing link, or like where do you think that balance was when it comes to what you would like to see in order to keep clear, number one, that the Bernie populism is, as you're pointing out, not the type that would slide into authoritarianism as we're talking about, but at the same time that it is not removed from a specific set of policy ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think that whatever the many problems may have been, with that movement, and obviously, something went wrong, right? Because not very many months ago, the entire mainstream discussion was about whether if Bernie showed up at the Democratic convention with only a plurality of delegates, should he still be the nominee?
Yeah.
And it turned out that wasn't the problem. But I certainly don't think that being light on policy detail was ever really the issue there. I mean, I think there were always, it was always very good that way, right? I think that, and certainly, the kind of rhetoric about opposing interests was good in my view, right? I mean, like you should point out that this isn't just something that's like a sort of weird coincidence that something like Medicare for All has pulled as well as it has for as long as it has, and it's so marginal in terms of its chances of becoming reality politically. That there are structural reasons for this. That makes sense to me. I think that maybe part of the problem, and I don't want to let the Bernie campaign off the hook for mistakes that they undoubtedly did make. I mean, the proof is in the pudding, right? They lost, but
yes.
But I also think that part of the reason that you do sometimes get this confusion, part of the reason you do get people who are even like Bernie Trump swing voters, which, has been exaggerated, right? There are fewer of those certainly than there were, Hillary McCain swing voters in 2008. But it is also true that there are people who would have voted for Bernie and, who ended up voting for Trump. And there are people who I think would be receptive to a Bernie message who end up like watching Tucker Carlson and nodding along with everything that he says. And I think that the reason for that is bigger than any mistakes that Bernie people may have made in 2016 or 2020, because what Bernie was speaking to was this kind of larger hunger for some kind of message that identified the sense that a lot of people have of reality, that the game is rigged against them, that we're not just sort of having this neutral policy discussion about what the best way to go about solving these problems is, that politics is catering to the interests of a relatively small minority of the population and many, many issues, right? And that's not a sense that people have that's wrong, right? That's right. And I think that when there are so few people who are really speaking to it, especially in a relatively effective, compelling way, that it does make some sense that people would be a little bit of a cheap date about it, that all it takes is Tucker Carlson going on Fox and talking about how American workers have gotten a raw deal and saying some bad stuff about Jeff Bezos, and that a lot of people could hear that and say, hey, there's somebody who's telling it like it is. He must be on their side. And then you sort of don't, like, if you're happy about that, right? You're happy to have that spoken to, then you sort of, it's way too easy to miss the fact that when it comes to what concretely to do about this, right? Other than, than this kind of cruel, strict enforcement of immigration laws, and kind of going back to historic Republican protectionism, right? Like, I'm pretty sure from the 1850s to the 1950s, the Republican Party was more protectionist than Trump is now, right? And nobody mistook them for champions of ordinary people at the expense of American business interests. That, like, if that's all he's saying, or like there's a famous segment where Tucker is praising something Elizabeth Warren said about economic patriotism, and people have pointed to that out to me often, in the course of these discussions, like, hey, look at how there's some convergence between the right and the moderate left on this, that he's praising this economic statement by Elizabeth Warren, but I remember watching that. It's like, once you get to the end, right, the very end of it, where he actually starts talking about policy, like the only specific Warren policy items he endorses there are more apprenticeship programs and the government should buy American where possible, which, given the scale of the poverty, the lack of health insurance, the ridiculous wages, everything that is the actual discontent that he's speaking to, that's almost farcically little to actually give people as far as policy solutions.
Yeah, once you get to the policy part, it completely falls apart. We're going to go to a break on the podcast, TV, and radio show, but my full conversation with Ben will be on our YouTube channel.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There's a 3 or 4 minute clip of an interview that Donald Trump granted to Jonathan Swan, an Axios reporter. And it is the stuff of legend. It is the stuff of horror. It is the stuff of nightmares. Donald Trump saying during this interview that not only does he read a lot, but he comprehends what he reads really, really well, better than anyone that Jonathan Swan has ever interviewed, or at least recently, which is quite a statement. Take a look at this.
I wouldn't mind. If it reached my desk, I would have done something about it. It never reached my desk because...
Do you read your written brief?
I do. I read a lot. Really? You know, I read a lot. They like to say I don't read. I read a lot.
I
comprehend extraordinarily well, probably better than anybody that you've interviewed in a long time. I read a lot. I spend a lot of time with at meetings.
So is there anybody in my audience who's willing to defend Trump on this, that his reading comprehension is really, really good? By most reports, Donald Trump has not read a single entire book in decades, in his entire adult life, which is like the last 50 years. I am not aware of any book that Donald Trump has actually read cover to cover. People I know who have really good reading comprehension skills, they never brag about reading comprehension, put quite simply. Like anybody who has good reading comprehension skills talks about the subject matter of what they read rather than the fact that they're really good at reading and understanding stuff. And this was only the tip of the iceberg, a bunch of other strange moments in this interview. And the story really in the interview, other than Trump claiming he can read well, which is a strange thing for presidents to ever have to defend. The real theme of this interview is Trump bending over backwards to defend not confronting Vladimir Putin about anything. Take a look at Trump here explaining why he did nothing about that entire Russian bounty story, which I continue trying to bring up. Did nothing about Russia arming the Taliban, did nothing about anything related to Russia. Take a look.
I have so many briefings on so many different countries, but this one didn't reach my desk.
The reason I say this is even if you don't believe this particular piece of intelligence, and there is dispute, no doubt there is dispute in the intelligence community about it, your former, John Nicholson, former head of forces in Afghanistan, said, and this is when he was working for you, that Russia is supplying weapons to the Taliban. Isn't that enough to challenge Putin over the killings of US soldiers?
Well, we supplied weapons when they were fighting Russia too. You know, when they were fighting with the Taliban in Afghanistan.
It's a different era.
Well, I'm just saying.
So Trump just erratically brings up a completely different situation, unrelated to him as president and Putin now as president and their relationship. This, by the way, doesn't have to be anything more than Trump is enamored with Putin. You know, you have now, there's this slice of the left who's getting a lot of mileage of saying, oh, the Russia Gators, they were crazy. You don't have to be alleging anything here other than Trump, we know, is really impressed with authoritarians. The people he's impressed with are Putin, Duterte, Kim Jong-un, Erdogan, etc. And there's no conspiracy being alleged other than Trump's enamored with dictators, and he seems particularly enamored with Vladimir Putin, and he seems to be finding any way he can, grasping at straws, to defend not being tough on Putin, not confronting Putin. That's all that this has to be. You don't have to allege some bigger conspiracy. Now, later in the interview, Jonathan Swan pushes Trump, and insanely sort of ends up having to explain to Trump what's going on. It's very bad, and it exposes Trump's complete lack of knowledge of even basic foreign policy realities.
But you surely heard that, right? I mean, it's well known in the intelligence community that they're arming the Taliban, Russia.
I don't know. When you say arming, is
supplying
the Taliban
weapons.
Paying, or are they giving
Russia
them?
Is supplying weapons and money to the Taliban.
I have heard that, but it's never, it's never reached my desk.
I mean, he said it on the record when he was in...
Hey, Russia doesn't want anything to do with Afghanistan. Let me just tell you about Russia.
Trump has access to the, not that he necessarily is taking people up on it, but Trump has access to the latest and greatest intelligence in the world. And you can tell that he seems to be hearing much of what Jonathan Swan is bringing up for the first time from a reporter, or at least hearing it in a way that he has to react substantively. Then Trump, knowing that he's flailing and failing, tries to give Jonathan Swan a history lesson, and it gets really awkward.
Russia used to be a thing called the Soviet Union. Because of Afghanistan, they went bankrupt. They became Russia, just so you do understand, okay? The last thing that Russia wants to do is get too much involved with Afghanistan. They tried that once. It didn't work out.
How wild is that, right? But to focus on the primary topic here, Donald Trump has not confronted Vladimir Putin about supposed Russian bounties for Taliban killing U.S. troops. Trump hasn't talked to him about it, and Trump clearly has no interest in talking to Vladimir Putin about it, despite the fact that they've now had at least one conversation since that story came out. It's a sort of jaw-dropping lack of self-reflection or even an interest in understanding what the circumstances are and just how bad it looks. And it's hard to fathom that this is the president of the United States, at least for a few more months and hopefully no longer, sort of like a sixth grader. Listen, I remember there were times, maybe not in sixth grade, but in middle school, where I wrote a book report about a book I didn't read. Okay, I admit it. There were times when I did that. That's sort of the equivalent of what Donald Trump is trying to do here. Now, the very last thing, Donald Trump says it never reached his desk, that this story of alleged Russian bounties never reached his desk. That definitely seems to be a lie. There has been widespread and specific New York Times and other reporting which claims that indeed Donald Trump was briefed multiple times about this and he just did nothing. Now, I've given you the timeline in the past, arguably as many as 3 or 4 different times over the last year and a half or so where Donald Trump was briefed about this. New York Times reported that Trump got written briefing in February of 2020. Now, that's just, 5-6 months ago in a presidential daily briefing. Trump in this interview claims he reads it. So a sort of clever question, because Jonathan Swan gets Trump to at least claim he reads his PDBs. We know that this was in his PDB in February. Now, CNN says that Trump was briefed somewhere in the area of March, April, May on this. And then Associated Press sources quote top White House officials who say Trump was made aware of this in early 2019, a full year earlier than the New York Times and CNN say. So it's not just lies. It's not just being enamored with Putin. It's also either incompetence or a complete lack of memory about the fact that he was allegedly briefed about this multiple times, or a sort of all of the above scenario. But there's it's, either you care about this stuff or you don't. Either you're concerned about having an incompetent buffoon as president or you're not. Tens of millions of people are not, and they're going to be voting for another 4 years of this in just a few months. So if we want to prevent that from being the outcome, we know what to do. I don't have to give you you don't have to understand mechanical physics or string theory or anything to understand what the thing is. You've got to vote. Everybody's got to vote. That's it. So Republican Congressman Louie Gohmert from Texas, one of the wackiest and most ignorant members of Congress out there, has tested positive for coronavirus. Now, Gohmert has also aggressively refused to wear masks, but he believes that some brief moment of mask wearing may actually be what gave him the virus. I'm going to show you that video in a moment, but as a reminder, for months, Louie Gohmert has been seen on Capitol Hill refusing to wear a mask. In fact, just 2 days ago, he was at Attorney General Bill Barr's hearing and walked out of the room right behind William Barr, neither wearing a mask, neither he nor William Barr wearing a mask, that is, raising questions about Barr's possible exposure. Barr has reportedly tested negative since. Gohmert said back in June that he didn't need to wear a mask because he didn't have the virus, but said he would put a mask on if he were to get infected. Apparently, he must have worn a mask at some point, because here is video of Louie Gohmert, now COVID positive, saying, it might have been wearing a mask that gave me the virus.
I can't help but wonder if by keeping a mask on and keeping it in place, that if I might have put some germs, some of the virus onto the mask and breathed it in. I don't know, but I got it. We'll see what happens from here. But the reports of my demise are very premature.
The mask gave him the virus, but he doesn't really wear masks. If you can imagine this, he was actually scheduled to have some kind of birthday barbecue fundraiser later in August where donors were going to be given meet and greet access to him. That crazy Fox News host, former Judge Jeanine Pirro, was going to be there as a special guest. No word on what's going on with that event. No word from Fox News as to whether Jeanine Pirro would still be part of the event if it were going to happen. But the mask wearing has become very, very partisan at this point. There's an Axios Ipsos poll from a few weeks ago, which found that 2/3 of Democrats are wearing masks all the time when they're outside their homes in public, whereas only about half that number, 35% of Republicans, are wearing masks. So it is a significant partisan divide. And that plays into, remember my report from earlier this week, that what has forced Trump or pushed Trump to change his tone on coronavirus has been that advisors went to him and said, it's disproportionately our people. That's the word they used, our people who are getting this. So it might be bad from an election standpoint if this continues. Now, a few other things to show you on this. Louie Gohmert went on Sean Hannity's Fox News program last night, and Sean Hannity was encouraging him to take hydroxychloroquine. And Gohmert said, yeah, I'm taking it. And it was barely coherent. He called it hydroxychloroquine or something like that. Take a look at this.
You're a guy at Cedars-Sinai that knows more about hydroxychloroquine than anybody. Have you thought about any of these? Have you talked to your doctor about it? Any thoughts on it for yourself?
Yes. Yes, I have. And thanks for the discussion you've had about it. You've talked about the one study that said it was affected, had to be withdrawn. So, my doctor and I are all in. And I got a text just before I came on from a dear friend doctor that just found out he had it. And he said he started the DQ regimen too. So zinc, erythromycin, and the hydroxychloroquine. And that will start just in the next day or two. Yep. So thank you.
So Gohmert, how is this real life? Gohmert not only has no idea what he's taking, he actually says that Hannity's propaganda coverage of hydroxychloroquine at least partially influenced his desire to take it. And then just one more little video for you. Here is Republican Congressman Kevin McCarthy calling Louie Gohmert Congressman COVID and then correcting himself.
You want to be able to trace it, put him out, and just as Congressman Louie Gohmert says that he doesn't have any symptoms, there could be other people like that. So.
What a world that we live in. That's just perfect. Yeah, I think going forward, I should refer to Louie Gohmert as Congressman COVID. Now, to get serious for a second, Herman Cain went to Donald Trump's Tulsa, Oklahoma rally, or Tulsa, as some people say, and he was then diagnosed with coronavirus. He has now died. And there's every reason to believe that Herman Cain, former presidential candidate and supporter of Trump, caught the virus at Trump's Corona rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He is dead now. Okay. So when we talk about this, I take no pleasure in Herman Cain dying of coronavirus, even as it appears he caught it at an optional rally that Donald Trump did. But we've just got to be serious and realistic here. When I talk to people in other countries, people like Louie Gohmert and these other moron Republicans, they often come up. And sometimes people in other countries just can't even understand what's going on. Like, how is it even possible for people like Gohmert to get elected? How is it even real life that Donald Trump is holding a rally with 6,500 people indoors in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which now, as far as we believe, led to the infection of Herman Cain and subsequently the death? Like, did Trump kill his friend by having that rally? Is that a crazy thing to say? How is it even possible that Louie Gohmert is elected? And you really just have to understand the United States to understand that. I mean, understand the electorate in the Texas 1st Congressional District. These are not ad hominems. The Texas 1st Congressional District, where Louie Gohmert is elected, and the district that he represents, it's wildly right-wing. Trump got 72% of the vote in the 1st District of Texas in 2016. Mitt Romney got 72% of the vote in 2012. McCain got 69% in 2008. Bush got 68 and 69% in 2000 and 2004. This is a wildly right-wing area, and that correlates at this point in time, 2020 in the United States, disproportionately with anti-science beliefs. Texas's first district has even more pronounced Texas problems. Texas is not a place with particularly good healthcare. Texas is not a place with particularly good education. It's extra not good in the first district of Texas. So this is a complicated place. They tragically keep electing Louie Gohmert, and we're seeing the consequences of this anti-science ideology. One of the things I'm going to talk about at the start of tomorrow's program is that Dr. Anthony Fauci is now in the unenviable position of having to beg and plead with America to listen to science and doctors. That's where we are. Meanwhile, look at what's happening in New Zealand. Look at what's happened in South Korea. Look at Vietnam. Look at, Greece. Dramatically different places culturally, geographically, and economically all have figured out how to deal with the virus. And this is what we're dealing with. This is a tragedy. And, the human toll, party aside, is my priority. I don't want anyone to get the virus or die. But there is one side that has been the cause of these problems, and they must be held accountable. If they are not, what's to prevent them from doing exactly the same thing next time? We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail about whatever happened to that payroll tax cut Trump
David,
talked
calling
about.
from Texas. No one's talking about the fact that the Republicans are not doing the payroll tax cut right now, that they're not for it.
Right.
In my opinion, is because they know once Joe Biden is confirmed as president, should he get the nomination, that he is going to do the payroll tax cut, and the blood will be on the Democrats' hands.
I'm not so sure about that. I think Republicans are in favor of the payroll tax cut, but they recognize that there's a good chance nothing happens if that becomes the sticking point. I also am just not sure that Joe Biden is going to do it. So I'm interested in the way in which the payroll tax cut stuff has imploded on Trump, but I don't know that I agree with this particular analysis. But let me know what you think. Is this caller on to something? We've got a great bonus show for you today. Russia's looking to approve a coronavirus vaccine within weeks, according to a new report. Trump's looking at banning TikTok in the United States, and we will talk about the lack of resources for a lot of people who want to vote by mail. What do I mean by that? We will discuss it. Get instant access to the bonus show by becoming a member at joinpakman.com or a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Thanks so much for watching today's full episode of the show. Just a reminder, today's sponsor is Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist for free and save 25% off of a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've also included the link right underneath this video.